It's all right, Octi. I got you. The lake water sloshed as about Pinky helped Octavia onto the shore. Come on, the street's not far. Just walk slowly. Pinky wrapped Octavia's arm around her shoulders to help her sister walk, ignoring the cold water that soaked her in return. Pinky? Octavia muttered through the quivering lips, her breath visible in the cold air. Octi, you're freezing. How long were you in that water for? You're losing too much body heat. We have to get you inside now. Pinky's words were urgent, and she could just feel how cold Octavia was. Octavia struggled to find the words, unable to believe what was happening. She had found her sister. She had found Pinky, but her body was freezing, her mind still recovering from the cold, and from that hellish battle she had just endured. Everything still ached from being tossed around and sliced open. Her mind was just in a hazy fog. She only just barely felt the warmth of Pinky's body against her. Just stay awake from me, Octi. I know a place nearby where we can warm you up, Pinky insisted, trying to keep Octavia awake. The gray mare had felt her eyes drooping as her adrenaline had worn out, and felt herself slipping out of consciousness. However, the jostle of Pinky's body, in the instances in her voice, was just motivation to keep herself awake. As her hooves numbly walked alongside her sister, she couldn't help but notice that her surroundings seemed whiter than before. They were quickly approaching the place that Pinky had insisted they would go to warm up in, and before the creaky metallic doors opened, Octavia swore she saw something small and white float across her vision. Here you go, Octi. Drink up, Pinky said, offering a comforting smile of a cup of warm cocoa to the gray mare, who was now wrapped up in several warm blankets and sitting comfortably on a comfortable silk pillow. Oh, thank you, Pinky, Octavia said, still reaching and shivering her hoof out to take the mug before looking down at it. It was exactly as she remembered her sister making it, whipped cream to the point of hiding the cocoa, and decorated with multicolored sprinkles. The warmth of the mug in her hoofs felt wonderful and on her own, so without hesitation, she brought the cup up to her lips and took a sip. After everything she had been through over the last 2 weeks, and the horrors that she had been a part of that day, the drink was like heaven itself growing down her throat. The drink immediately brought the warmth back to her chest and face, and the chocolatey sweetness brought many sanity back to her mind. It was dark drink that was sent from the heavens to deliver her from the torment, and her sister was the angel that had given to her. Oh, sweet Celestia, Octavia exhaled softly, just letting the warmth of the drink bathe over her. It was such a simple thing, but it was meant to the world to her. She opened her eyes to look at her sister and the pink mare just sitting on her own cushion just a few feet away. As Octavia licked her lips of the cream that had no doubt stuck to them, she couldn't help but take in just how Pinky looked. It was just so vastly different from anything Octavia was used to seeing her sister wear. It was Pinky, so of course. She had worn various outfits for various parties before. Octavia had seen clown outfits, outfits themed by the decade, and even some formal wear for fancier parties like Pinky had thrown. But this outfit felt none of the words that came to her mind whoever thought she would think about Pinky. Seductive, sexy, whatever. A skin-tight red jacket that was leather matched her very heavy eyeshadow and earrings. Her hair was straight and covered half her face, giving her a smoky, seductive look to them. Around her waist, the flank was a thin, flimsy, see-through pink skirt that had nothing but eccentric curves that brought out the teasing imagery about her back end. On top of that, being her hind leg was wrapped in the fishnet stockings that stopped just short from her rump, framing it and giving it a bit more push to make it more of a push or plush. In every sentence of the word, it looked like Pinky was dressed up to seduce, and it didn't matter who she seduced. So, Octi, what were you doing in that lake and that? And where did you get that huge gash on your back? Octavia's thoughts slammed against the wall at the moment she heard Pinky's worried tone. She looked up at her sister, and despite the new look, she was giving her that look that would express her genuine worry and care. Octavia mentally kicked herself for having to thought of her sister so crassly. There was an explanation for Pinky's current look. After all, her hair didn't go flat unless she was upset about something. Octavia muttered, trying to put her words together. I'm not even sure really how to explain. I don't know if I can explain. I just. She shook her head quickly. Pinky, what's going on with the town? Where is every pony? Why is there fog everywhere? And why are there monsters walking the streets? Monsters? Pinky asked in confused, tilting her head. I don't know what you mean by monsters, but as far as the fog goes, it's a weather screw up. And from what I've heard, apparently there was an accident at the cloud making factory, resulting in a spill of experimental clouds that ended up covering the whole towns. So apparently Pegasi were having difficulty clearing it, but they'd expected to have vanished on its own within a day or two. Pinky shook her head. There was a little annoying, but nothing we can deal with. As for every pony is, she gently shrugged. I assume they're just hiding in their houses. No point in going outside if you can't see five hooves in front of your own face. Octavia could only stare in bewilderment at her sister's answer. It seemed too mundane for her to answer everything that had just experienced that way. There was no way she imagined it at all either. The spitters, the lickers, the masked mare. She hadn't just imagined all of it. Octi, you're shaking, Pinky asked worriedly. Octavia's eyes widened in surprise as she looked down at her mug she was holding, noticing the shuddering of her own body. She gingerly placed the cup down before wrapping herself into a tighter bundle of blankets. There aren't really monsters out there? She asked quietly, fearfully, afraid to answer the question. It's just a weather accident? Nothing more? Are you seeing monsters, Octi? Pinky asked, getting up from her pillow and walking closer to the drawer and her terrified sister. It's okay to tell me what you've seen. I promise I only want to help. Pinky lifted her hoof up and placed it against Artie's cheek, lifting the mare to face up at her. Octavia's eyes, tired, teared eyes, beheld Pinky's cheerful smile. Even though the makeup and the gaze, Octavia couldn't help but see the kind, happy sister that she'd always had known and loved. It didn't matter why she looked the way she did. She would always be Pinkie Pie. She opened her mouth to speak, to answer, wanting to express all the troubles that she had faced in such a short time, but her mouth fell back closed. Shades of magenta filled the edges of her vision. Flat, silky, smooth hair that was normally bright, vibrant pink and as curly as it was poofy. Her sister was dealing with her own worries and her own troubles. As the older sister, it was her job to help make Pinky feel better. It was sworn obligation as the eldest Pie sisters to be responsible to one, to be mature enough to handle her own problems, so that her sisters could look up to her and depend on her. Octavia swallowed the lump that had formed in her throat and gave her sister an answer that she was willing to believe in herself. I've been having nightmares, Pinky. Octavia closed her eyes, leaning against Pinky's hoof. Awful, horrible, relentless nightmares. I haven't been able to sleep because of them. I tried changing my diet, relaxing before bed. I even tried one of your home remedies, solving a handstand in the shower, and so far, nothing has really worked. She then gently shook her head before opening her eyes again. I came to Ponyville because I remembered that you had been suffering from terrible nightmares as well, and that you solved them. Octavia sat up a little, gripping the blankets tighter as she looked away from Pinky. They've also caused me to sleepwalk, and I think it's how I ended up in the water. It was a nightmare of a terrible, awful cage made out of steel and blood, and a monster attacked me in it. I must have fallen asleep on the way there, walked right into the lake. Octavia tried to chuckle softly at the silly imagery, almost willing to believe in the story herself. That was silly of me. But now that you're here, we can get rid of my nightmares. I just need to use the same solution as you, and we should be fine. Are you sure that's all? Pinky asked, tilting her head questioningly. I. Octavia stammered back. Pinky just stared at her for a moment, before offering a soft smile. All right, I believe you, Octi. Her sister offered, lovingly pulling Octi into a hug. I'm sorry that you've been through such awful nightmares, sis, but I'm here for you now. We'll go see Twilight right away, and she'll help you get rid of those nasty nightmares in no time. Octavia felt her own weight on her chest grew lighter at Pinky's words. For the first time in a long while, a genuine smile appeared on her face, and she leaned into a hug gently, squeezed her sister back in return. Thank you, Pinky. Forgive me for such being a burden on you. Oh, don't be silly. What else are big sisters for? Pinky said happily, giving Octavia one last squeeze before pulling back from the hug. Though you still need to warm up first and finish your coca, because I need to get this place ready to be open, and probably leave a note for the person coming after me as to why I'm not here. My big sister comes first, after all. Pinky softly chuckled. Huh? Octavia blinked in confusion. You ready to open? You work here? Well, yeah. How else do you think I got in? Pinky chuckled, before moving across the room. Let me just go get things set up, and then we can head off to Twilight's. With that, Pinky left the room, leaving Octavia on her own. Now that Pinky had mentioned it, she really hadn't paid much attention to that Pinky had dragged her into. Her eyes scanned the room, and she took notice of the particular decor of the room. Most notably, there were several vanities set up across the room, with a small velvet pillow before, and the mirrors individually decorated. Each station had several drawers with hints of clothing sticking out, and several assortments for the makeup on top of them. In another corner of the room, there was a clothing rack that contained all sorts of clothing very similar to what Pinky was wearing, and some even more revealing than that. Is this some kind of performance feed here? Octavia murmured out loud, looking around the decor to try to figure out where she was exactly. She couldn't really put her hoof on it, but she really got the feeling it wasn't a very high class establishment. For the lack of better words, she might have been able to shake that feeling that something was off, and it was just the vanities, but the type of clothing they had just hanging from the rack. Octavia shook her head and picked up her mug of coca, quickly draining across the contents. While she had been normally to content while sitting there and enjoy the warm drink, she had a sinking feeling in her gut that something wasn't right. With her drink now gone, she shed the blankets and grabbed her saddlebag. Stepping out of the room, she felt anxiety hit her throat as she entered the fairly dark hallway. She had no idea where she was, and the last few hours of her life had taught her to be very wary of her new locations. There were a couple of doors lining the walls, with each one at the end of the hallway leading to a turn that exit out onto the main floor. The door she had just stepped on had the words dressing room, employees only on it. At the other end of the hallway was a large exit sign that had been the way she came in, so Pinky must have gone the other way. Moving down the hallway didn't give her much comfort. The doors she passed all labeled such as VIP shower room and VIP velvet room. There were several variations of those VIP rooms, which caused Octavia to gulp a lump in her throat. No, no, this can't be. Pinky would never. Octavia's steps sped up, quickly reaching to the end of the hallway, pushing through a door for the strings of beads that spilled out into the main room. Before she stepped on her tracks, it was a large open area with seats set up around the main stage. The stage was long with a circle with a pole sticking out of the ceiling. The chairs were all turned to face the stage, especially the center, with some smaller tables and seats up spaced out around the room as well. There was a bar with a locked up liquor cabinet, and with the area with the DJ's booth, and the hallways had to lead to private dance areas. No matter in the way Octavia looked at it, she couldn't see anything but a strip club. Octavia then jumped to her skin as the music started playing across the club. It was slow jazzy song that was meant to be played in the time for those female performers on stage. The next, the lights began to flicker and strobe, changing colors and moving down just short circles before turning to normal. The music quieted down, and Pinky walked out from behind the DJ's booth before looking up in surprise at her sister. Oh, I wasn't expecting you to come out here, Pinky chuckled softly, almost embarrassed. I wasn't going to take that long to make sure everything was in order. Honest, you could have waited for me. Pinky, this is... Octavia was at a loss for words. Is this where you work? Yeah, I kinda do, Pinky softly said in embarrassment with clearing her voice. Sorry I never told you. It's not exactly the place you're proud of to tell your family about it, you know. Octavia felt numb. She couldn't believe that her sister was saying. This wasn't like Pinky. This wasn't like her at all. She wasn't like this. But you said you were a party pony extraordinaire. This is not what it is at all. Octavia then shook her head, still refusing to believe what her sister was saying. And you plan to throw parties. People pay you to help them throw parties. Something clicked in Octavia's mind that her mouth curved into a desperate, worried smile. That's what it is, right? The club is you just asked you to help to set up for their performances. That's what's kind of like a party, right? Pinky's expression felt a little, although the smile did not fade. She then turned away looking from her older sister, and Octavia could tell that this was out of shame or something else. She slowly, but of course, the slow jazz swaying background was still slowing down as the last song was coming to an end. Faint as Pinky made her way up to the stage, she hopped down onto it and walked over to the pole, looking up at it. When the song ended, Pinky stood up, wrapping her hoof around the pole, resting on her forehead against it. Octavia wasn't so sure what she was seeing, but the next song began to play. Low-thumping pop song began to waft through the room, and Pinky's eyes slowly opened to the rhythm of the song. Her head flew back, letting the hair cascade against her back, and her eyes gave out a seductive look over to Octavia. Her hips cocked forward and then back and forward again as her legs lifted up and wrapped around the pole. In the beat of the music, she began to dance with the pole, jutting, grating, spinning, swishing her hair back and forth so perfectly, and it always extending to those eyes. Octavia couldn't even take her eyes off the performance. Her eyes were widening at shock at the display. Pinky just wasn't good on the pole. She was amazing. And when her heartbeat would shift down too, so to her form, there was a lull in the song that would drag out the action. Her eyes were smoking and hot, and enhanced by the crimson-yellow eyeshadow. Despite the shock, even Octavia could feel the temperature rising in display, unable to pull away from Pinky's erotic display. Pinky's jacket slipped down to her shoulders as she closed her eyes, silently moaning as if the act was pleasurable. Octavia couldn't help but swallow. Her body began to shake as she watched. The world felt warm, and everything was spinning. Was this really her sister? Was this what she really did for a living? Did she have really been so blind as every time that she had visited? The song felt painstakingly long, but finally had the display that was coming up to an end as the song winded down. Pinky gave one last twirl on the pole, before cascading her hair with a flick of her head, and gave Octavia one last look as the music ended. Octavia's mouth hung open in shock, quivering, trying to say something, anything to what she had just seen. At some point she had fallen into the sitting position, her vision growing blurry, and her head fell forward too ashamed to continue staring at her sister. She stared at wherever her hooves met the ground, emotions swelling up, confused turmoil in her head leaving her back shocked and dazed. And that's why I really told you, Pinky spoke up, hopping off the stage, although her voice no longer had that happy chirp to it. I figured you'd react this way. But why, Pinky? Octavia begged, lifting up her head to look at her sister. Tears were welling in her eyes, threatening to spill over. Is someone blackmailing you? Are you being threatened? Do you need this money that badly? I thought I was working so hard for you not to have to sell your body over like this. Pinky then looked over from Octavia, her bangs covering her face, although Octavia could swear she heard her sister's teeth clench. Have you really considered that I enjoyed it? Pinky asked, a quiet anger built in the back of her voice. That may be because I like entertaining ponies? That I like it because they look at me like that? That makes me happy to know I've made their night better. Octavia's eyes widened in shock, and her mouth dropping open again. What could she say? What was there to say? She felt the tears streak down her cheek as she lowered her head. I just want what was best for you. I am not a child anymore, Octi! Pinky yelled, slamming her hoof against the ground as she glared at her older sister. If I want to be a nightclub person, then I have every right to be one. It is my choice. Octavia went silent, staring at the ground as her tears fell. She was a failure, was she? She was a failure of an older sister? Pinky was right about somehow, but she couldn't really help but blame herself too. Maybe she had been there for Pinky when she wouldn't have turned out like this. Maybe if she stayed in Ponyville, then she could have helped Pinky see another way. Maybe she could have just trusted Pinky to begin with, and that knowledge just made it worse. Pinky hesitated on her spot, lowering her head. Octi, look, I'm sorry if I snapped at you. I never wanted you to find out that like this. Pinky's voice was solemn as she turned around, walking away from Octavia. I'm just almost done setting up, though. Wait one moment, and then we'll head to Twilight's. Octavia didn't lift her head. Just staring at the ground, her mind felt numb as the tears silently fell from her face. She failed as a sister. She failed as a daughter. Pinky was free to make her own decisions as an adult, but it didn't stop Octavia from feeling so wrenched inside. She wasn't so sure how long she stared at her hooves for. Long enough for her tears to dry up at least. Long enough for Pinky to tap her on the shoulder. Hey, I'm all done now. Her sister tried to give a smile at her comfort, but Octavia could tell things were going to be awkward for a while. She finally sniffed and wiped away her face, shaking a little, before nodding her head. Right, let's go to Twilight's, she was able to murmur. Pinky's smile picked up a little, at that the two of them made their way over to the front entrance of the club. Pinky stepped out first, and at the moment she did, a blast of cold air struck Octavia's face. Utterly confused, she walked behind Pinky, only to stare into complete dumbfounded at the sight before her. It was snowing in Ponyville. The ground was covered in a layer of frozen water, and it seemed that the fog had only gotten worse as a result. Come on, Twilight's this way. Pinky then nodded her head before walking off. Octavia snapped out of her thoughts quickly and caught up with her sister. The feeling in her body started to shiver, and she hadn't packed for the cold weather after all, and Pinky had at least had her jacket to keep her warm. Pinky, why is there snow? It's the middle of fall. Fall? Pinky asked, turning to her sister confused. Are you sure you didn't hit your head? It's the first snowfall of the winter, on schedule as intended. Octavia opened her mouth to protest, but quietly closed it as her eyes wandered into the snow. White specks of flaky snow continued gently rain down from the heavens, and Pinky wasn't disturbed by it at all. And for a moment she wondered if there was really a screw-up in the head, if she had just imagined that everything had happened. The pain in her limbs and the back had told her otherwise, but nothing made sense anymore. The more they walked, the more Octavia expected more of those monsters to appear around the bend, or a corner, or wandering to be in the middle of the street. Silence was the only answer to the anxiety her got, and the more she looked around, the less she saw. Pinky, are you sure every pony's just locked inside their homes? Octavia asked, hoping her answer would calm her nerves. I guess so. I mean, I couldn't blame them. Not only you can't see where you're going, but it's too cold too. Better bundle up and ride out the fog, am I right? Pinky chuckled with her usual kindness and charm. It was the attitude that would convince Octavia of anything. She swallowed the anxiety in her throat silently and followed along. The silence of their walk was only broken by the crunching snow under their hooves. Octavia hated the silence, but wasn't so sure what to say. So, Pinky, Octavia spoke up, unsure of how to broach the subject, but desperately wanting anything other than the silence. How did you, get started doing? Octavia tried to find the words to stay on the job, but they caught in her throat. Are you sure you want to talk about it? Pinky looked back at her sister. Octavia swallowed her nerves in the building in her throat. I guess I just wonder. How come you wanted to like it, I guess? I would feel better knowing that it was something who enjoyed and choose to do as opposed to it being something you had to do. Pinky looked at Octavia for a moment before turning away and go quiet. The crunch of the snow seemed to be louder than ever as Octavia waited for a response. I'm sure you have noticed this, Octavia. You're a beautiful mare. She then glanced back at her older sister. The stallions look they give you when they see a mare they want to be with. Yes, I have some fair share of suitors. Octavia smiled over the words. Not all of them are upstanding or repute the ponies either, but mainly why I never really picked up on dating. No one's particularly caught my eye. High school standards, I suppose. Pinky shook her head a little. I am sure that you make some stallion very happy, Octavia. I don't know about that. Octavia then chewed her lip nervously. But what's got to do with your job anyway? Well, as you know, I spent most of my early years throwing parties and making friends, and as you can imagine, I was very popular. Pinky chuckled a little. When you're a cute, popular mare, stallions notice you. Pinky paused as she spoke the next sentence slowly. They ask you out, they take you on dates, they try to make you their girl, and they try to go at it with you. That's what guys do after all. They see a girl, they want to have their way with her. A knot formed in Octavia's chest, not liking where this conversation was going. And in a way, I kind of liked the attention, you know? Pinky then laughed a hollow laugh. But then again and again, they wanted me all to themselves. A hog to me, to claim me. And they said they loved me. And when they were all doing was thinking of their second heads. So if I had said I love you to one and not the other, wouldn't that have hurt so many others? So many boys wanted me, but to pick one would be able to make the rest of the others sad. So I never settled. That didn't make any sense any guys happier, though for a while they tossed around nasty words, even calling me in the town the S word, and it did hurt. But it was kind of true. Pinky then shook her head. So rather than let it destroy me, I decided that I like it and ran with it. If I was going to be like that anyway, I was going to enjoy it. The attention, the desires, all of it. Once I make my decision, I walked into the Satan's saddle and they demanded me to hire her as a dancer. This time Pinky generally laughed. One of the prettiest mares of all of Ponyville walked into the club and told the owner that she wanted to dance for him. Can you imagine the joy of his face, Octi? I would have taken the picture. Another giggle came from the pink mare. I can only imagine, Pinky. Octavia tried to chuckle to herself, although she still felt worried to accept it as if it was real. So they had me learn to trade, how to serve guests, how to dance the pole, how private dances worked, the whole thing. And the more I did it, the more I loved it. Octavia could hear the chirpiness of Pinky's voice. Now I set my own terms, Octi. They come to see me, I intense them and make them happy, and my job is done. They can't touch me unless I want them to. So I spread happiness to those guys that want me, and they all get their fair share of me, because that's my job. I'm in control of my body, and anyone who touches it, I'm in complete control. Pinky's last words on the subject really hung heavy in the air. Octavia had lost her voice, knots forming in her throat as if everything she might have tried to say. She just followed Pinky along quietly, letting the things in her sister had said settle in. She didn't have long to change the conversation simmer through before Pinky chirped up happily again. Oh, Twilight's house is up ahead. Her sister picked up the pace, almost vanishing into the fog. Ah, Pinky, don't go too far ahead. Octavia cried out, picking up her own pace to keep up with her energetic sister. In short order, a familiar oak tree sat in the middle of the town, appeared to be through the snow and the fog. Octavia remembered it from where she used to live there, and it was a public library in town. And if she remembered it correctly from Pinky's letters, Twilight had moved in, turning the library into a home. Twilight, are you home? Pinky called out, knocking loudly at the door. Silence returned to them. Something felt wrong about the silence, and Octavia could feel it. Twilight, hello? Pinky called out again, knocking a little harder. This time the door creaked, opening a little from the knocking. Huh? She left the door open? It's a public library, right? Octavia swallowed her anxiety again, her ears perking up to try and hear any sounds, particularly from the static kind. Maybe someone just didn't close it properly from their visit? I guess so. Pinky sounded unconvinced. I'm going to check and see if Twilight's inside. With that, Pinky pushed the door open, calling out in the library as she hopped inside. Octavia followed along, closing the door behind her. The first floor of the library was just as she remembered it. Walls with books and a stairway that led deeper inside. It hadn't changed at all since the last time she had visited. Twilight! Pinky called out, her voice echoing throughout the empty building, which caused a chill to run down Octavia's back. Like the rest of the town, it was too quiet. Huh? That's weird. It's a little early for her and Spike to be out and about. Where did they go off to? While Pinky made her way up the stairs, Octavia made her way over to the center table. The way the town was covered in the fog and not the way a mouse stirred, it made Octavia believe that the hellish landscape of her nightmares. But without the monsters around, and Pinky was actually with her, was all that true? Had that all hell been actually real? Octavia came to a stop at the table, just noticing how much dust had collected on it, as if no one had been there in ages. She ran her hoof along it, wiping a line of dust clean from her table, and looking at her hoof. Judging from the pile up, the library could have been abandoned for years. She was starting to get a sinking feeling that everything had been real, and that Pinky was just... Her foster stopped as her eyes wandered across that book that lay on the table. Curious, she walked over to it, wiped the dust cover off, and reading the title, Dreams of Psychological Understanding. Octavia read the words out loud, having done so uncoincidentally. Why did the book sound familiar? She could have sworn she'd never heard of this book in her life, and yet there was something about it calling out to her. Her hoof reached out to the cover, ready to open the book. I can't find her anywhere, Pinky called out, coming down from the stairs and catching Octavia's attention. Not even a note on where they may have gone. I wonder if that's something... Oh, did you find something? Pinky quickly ran over, looking over at the table, her eyes widening in surprise. Oh, you found the book, Pinky said with a smile. Remember in my letter, I mentioned Twilight used the books to help me? That was the book. This one? Octavia furrowed her brow at the book. Something felt odd about it. Her memory fuzzy had a slight headache forming in her headache by the look of it. Was there something about this book? She lifted her hoof to place a cover, flip it open. Crack. Octavia and Pinky jumped at their skins, a loud crash echoing from the door. Immediately the phonograph in Octavia's bag began to ring wildly, and Octavia's heart sunk. Another thunderous crack echoed out throughout the library, and the front doors showed the hideous visible cracks from the strain it wasn't going to hold. Pinky, run! Octavia screamed, followed by the sound of a loud door crashing down. Through the dust of the floor, breaking the bore, a large head slithering into the room. A metallic mask attached to the face of the pony with no ears and an impossibly long neck was wrapped in barbed wire. The scared, tanned mess of leathery hide called it the body, rubbed it against the roof of the doorway that had been beaten down, cracking with the mere size of its presence. Octavia had seen this monster before, staring at her through Pinky's window, and again looming over at her in her apartment. Now it was unrestrained, freed of any boundaries blocking its way, a tall masked stallion. Its heavy iron legs slammed down onto the library, cracking the floor with each step. Its body rubbed against the doorway, cracking from the sheer weight and pressure. The whole building just seemed to shake from its entrance. And finally, when it all slipped away from the inside, the doorway caved in, crashing down into the pile of debris that blocked the only way in and out. What is that thing? Pinky cried out in terrified panic, backing away from uncertain as to what to do. I said run, Pinky! Octavia shouted again, rushing up to her sister and giving her a hurried shove. Pinky stumbled at the moment, staring at her sister in bewilderment, before noticing Octavia motioning to the stairs. Pinky quickly got caught on and turned around, racing back up the stairs as fast as she could. The elder sibling was not far from behind. Having to pause briefly to stare at the creature in horror, her hooves slammed against the staircase, watching Pinky's tail disappear onto the second floor as she desperately tried to follow suit. A hiss and crash roared throughout the library as the monster's head barreled through the staircase, causing Octavia to let out a horrified scream. She tripped over on her own hooves trying to stand up, tumbling off to the side and back down the first floor with a hard thud. She then felt wood and debris crash down around her, most of it peddling her coat. Her mind was spinning as she was lifted her head, looking up to see the long-necked monster, pulling its head out from the top of the staircase. The entrance of it on the second floor had collapsed as well, and now she was trapped with the first floor with it. Just her and the monster. She was grateful that Pinky had managed to get away, but still left her in the moral peril. She stumbled as best as she could with her hooves, threatening to slip out from underneath her. She quickly chambered over the debris and then just the other side of the room. The wail of the phonograph hammered in her ears as she turned around, facing the creature as it turned to stare at her. Her breathing was heavy, and her heart was thundering in her chest. The creature looked at it. It was slow, lumbering, and looked like it had surprisingly speed as it watched. She bit down her lip, hard enough to draw blood, trying not to let the panic and terror control her thoughts and actions. The monsters were real. This horrid town was real. Then she killed the monsters before. She just had to fight. She reached into her bag, intending to pull out the knife right back out. Her hoof paused, and then scrambled through her backpack, and her eyes went wide with realization. She dropped the knife at the last fight, and it had got washed away when the cage filled with water. She was defenseless. Her eyes snapped forward in realization that the monster was barreling down upon her. Her hooves finally reacted to her thoughts as she just managed to avoid its head slamming down where she had been standing, a loud crack echoing throughout the room as dust flung up into the air. She rushed her way out of the room. The creature lifted, turned its head to face Octavia once more. She stepped back, feeling the wall all stop her. She winced in realization, as she was just once again caged with something horrible. Only this time, she wasn't sure how to be able to fight it and get out of its way. The creature was huge, far too huge to realistically harm it with her bare hooves. Not to mention all of its legs were wrapped in thick, heavy metal. What was she supposed to do something against that towered far above her? The large neck was twisting in direction, and she had her moments to move again. Her mind was raced with options, thinking about what she could possibly do. Baited into hurting herself? Find some kind of opening or weak spot? Make a break for it for the hole to escape through? She then kicked off her back hooves and raced across the room that she had came crashing through where she had been standing. The bookshelf, which had been directly behind her, shattered into a shower of splinters and dusts, books flying away in every direction as they scattered across the library. Octavia panted heavily as she watched the creature pull out its head from the debris and looking straight at her. It would literally track her easy, and it didn't show any ounce of exhaustion. She could only keep dodging. That would only do her good for so long. At some point, she was going to run out of steam. She needed a plan. She needed to think of something. She had to leave my sister alone! Pinky screamed, jumping out from nowhere, and Octavia could see, landing on the monster's head. Octavia stared up in horror as her sister wrestled with the creature's face. All the while it flashed in silent protest at her. "Pinky, what are you doing?" Octavia screamed in return. She was certain that Pinky had gotten away as somewhere safety away from the monster, but now she had flung herself face first into the danger. "Saving you! What does it look like?" Pinky grunted, trying not to fling away from the tremendous force. Her hind leg kicked hard against its neck, scraping against the barbed wire digging into its flesh. She let out a cry of pain as the sharp metal cut into her leg, blood spilling out onto its neck. The creature shuddered as the contact it made with blood, claiming its thrashing and coming to stand still. Octavia stared at it frozen in place as Pinky hesitantly looked down at the creature. "Look, I didn't know what you are or where you come from," Pinky spoke calmly, trying to reason with the creature. "But if you won't leave right now, no one has to get hurt, okay?" Silence filled the library at Pinky's question. Octavia couldn't even hear her heartbeat. The creature wasn't moving, and Pinky just looked as confused as about the situation as Octavia was. Several moments passed, and with the creature not moving, Pinky opened her mouth to speak again. Its neck snapped violently, twisting and cracking as it flied back against the wall. "Pinky!" Octavia screamed in horror as Pinky was crushed against the wall. Air escaping her lungs, Pinky's eyes went wide in shock. Blood then splattered against the wall and slowly peeled, crashing down to the floor. Octavia's hooves moved to her mouth, unable to see what just happened. She couldn't even move. Her whole body was shaking. Her shaking breath got caught in her throat as she saw her sister move, twitching against the ground, groaning, trying to push herself up. The creature turned to look at Pinky, an entire body facing her. "No!" Octavia screamed. "You leave her alone!" Scrambling to her hooves, she grabbed the fallen piece of lumber from the debris and rushed forward straight to the creature, slamming it straight into one of the metallic slabs called legs. The wood shattered, splintering into pieces that flew in every direction. The creature's leg moved and kicking back, striking Octavia hard in the chest. Her breath left her. Her chest felt like caving in, her body slamming against the wall. Pain sneered into her mind as she hit the ground with a thump. Her hoof clutched against her chest as she gasped for air. Her vision was blurred, but she forced to keep her head up, her eyes focusing on Pinky. The pink mare looked up in return, looking at Octavia. The two stared at each other as the monster loomed over Pinky. There was nothing neither of them could do, and Pinky just gave Octavia a sad smile before mouthing out the words, "I'm sorry." Everything fell silent as the monster's heavy hoof came down crushing on top of Pinky. Blood splattered about from underneath as coating the library in crimson blood. Octavia's eyes widened in horror as everything froze around her. Pinky was dead, and she had just watched her sister being crushed to death by a monster. The word felt numb. She could only barely register tears streaming down her face, or the heavy thuds of the monster now returning its attention upon her. She didn't even move or flinched. It's then when its head came down to her face level with her. The faceless metal mask with blood splattered against its mouth stared straight into her soul. A dull thud struck her, and at first she didn't know what was happening, but then her head slowly came down and saw a thick, fleshly tendril, the same color as the monster's flesh, sticking out from its chest. Her hoof slowly moved, lifting up to try and touch it before the appendages pulled out. Blood spewed everywhere, and a large hole was now in the middle of her chest, having pierced right through her heart. All control of her body was lost as she crumbled over. Staring up at the masked creature, the appendage slivered its way back into its body as it tilted its head down to look at her. The last thing she saw was her vision faded to black, her life escaping from her.